Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to the Oscar Movie Marathon, where I watch a Best Picture winner every week, starting from 1970 and hopefully ending up in the present day, where I do a recap video for every decade of cinema. My name is JP Spoonmore, and we finally made it. A new millennium, a digital Pandora's box just waiting to be opened. And of course, we're going to start with the decade full of flip phones, skinny jeans, and the war on terror. I'm talking about none other than the early 2000s. Let's get started. Jeez. All right, if my tongue is blue, it's because of that. And if you've ever been to Brothers, you know what that is. I was going for more of a trashy vibe because of the 2000s. Not a lot of prestige in this decade, so I thought the least prestigious cocktail I could think of, the Brothers Blue Raspberry Pitcher. The 2000s. These are movies that came out when I was actually alive. Yeah, that's scary. Just for fun with the 2000s, I did watch a lot of other 2000s movies during these weeks, and Miramax has its hands in every script, production, everything. Like, I didn't know Miramax was big in horror until I watched the Wes Craven werewolf movie, The Curse. I forgot what it's called. But Harvey Weinstein tore that film to shreds on day one of production. They had to reshoot it 4 times. That's how much of a dick this guy was. He was so much of a dick, Peter Jackson turned him into an orc in Return of the King. That like weird malformed dude that's like the general at Pelennor Fields and stuff. He's modeled after Harvey Weinstein. And it's like, once you see it, it's kind of hard to forget about it. Like, that's how much he had influence over the industry in these last 2 decades. So when it comes to Harvey Weinstein's control over Hollywood, it was more in the actors category in awards, not the best picture. The Miramax ad campaigns that they would do every year were very obnoxious and overbearing and very effective. So they got a lot of nominations. But in terms of the Best Picture category, they only have 4. 2 of them in the 90s and 2 of them in this decade. So I think I've seen all of their Best Picture winners at this point. Again, a lot of their wins are from like the actors categories and other ones. So they've had 278 nominations in their entire lifespan. They've won 68 awards out of those 278 nominations. That is also crazy impressive. And the 4 Best Picture winners that they have won, they've been nominated for like pretty much every single time. But the ones that they won were The English Patient, Shakespeare in Love, which that's one of the controversial ones, Chicago, which is an interesting one, and No Country for Old Men. That one, I would say, does deserve that award. In terms of the Best Picture category, it's not as bloody as the rest of Miramax's history. He keeps getting more court cases and keeps being found guilty, so justice sometimes prevails, but it took a while for him to like really get caught. The Me Too movement exists because of this guy. It's kind of a hard conversation to have with Oscars already being controversial in not picking the right movie or ignoring certain minorities, and the Oscars So White campaign in like 2015 or something that I'll talk about next video. This guy was a big deal, and he was an evil dude, and he's not the only one, but he's kind of the face of that kind of corruption and power. So, and that face is all over the 2000s, everywhere. Besides Miramax, I will say the 2000s honestly almost broke me. I'm starting to feel the fatigue of this like challenge. It's not really meant to be a challenge, it's pretty easy, but there are some movies where you look at them and it's like, I don't want to watch that. I really don't want to sit through 2 hours of whatever this movie thinks it's doing. And the 2000s is full of that. The first half. This decade is feast or famine. It has some of the greatest Best Picture winners, and it has the worst Best Picture winner. It's egregious the spread this decade has compared to all the other ones. Like the 80s is probably the most like flat, consistent one. The 2000s, roller coaster. The late 2000s kind of saved whatever the hell was going on in the early 2000s. Weird trends in this decade. Half of these movies take place in the present day. That is unheard of for Best Picture winners. All the rules on how to win Best Picture that I have kind of said out loud and seen for the past 3 decades, the 2000s throws that out the window and it does its own shit. Like, we start with Gladiator in 2000 and it's a sword and sandals, epic historical drama. That is very 90s. But after that, it is doing weird shit and I kind of respect it, but some of it is really bad and the rest of it is fantastic. Year 2000, there's a 2 at the beginning of these years now. Holy shit. We got Gladiator. And Gladiator, I've seen this movie probably like 5 times. Everyone loves this movie. It is very similar to the 90s, historical, epic drama with romantic triangle and all that stuff. I will say, on rewatch of this movie, after seeing all those 90s movies and the 80s movies, the production of this movie was clearly a nightmare. Post-production, you can see they were scrambling to fix all these problems. Every fix it in post trick they are using. And you could still see through some of it. Like, oh, he's petting a horse. And then there's like a sound guy in jeans right behind the horse. And he's like, oh shit. And he like has to hide behind. Or like the chariot falls over and the gas canister that like blows it so falls over, the skirt comes off. So the gas canister's right there in full frame, right in front of the camera. It's like, oh, all right, that's the only take we have of it, so we have to use it. You can tell the production was rocky at best. The big first battle, it is rough. There's weird shutter things because they choose to make one shot slow-mo, but it wasn't filmed for slow motion. So it's really choppy. And the buildup is really good for that battle. You know, you see the armies and the landscape and the geometry is all established. And Russell Crowe is giving the performance of a lifetime. But once the battle actually starts, it is rough. And a lot of the scenes outside the Colosseum are really awkward and they just kind of push through to kind of tell you what you need to know. And then, oh, okay, let's just go back to the arena. We just need to go back to the Colosseum because once we're back in the Colosseum, it's one of the greatest action movies of all time. Ridley Scott is one of my favorite directors that I will defend, even though a lot of his movies are rough. On one end, he's made Alien, and on the other end, he's made House of Gucci and Napoleon. He's a very impressive filmmaker with a very awkward track record. He's an idea guy, and he has a very different style of doing production than most other people. So it's fun to follow his career, but I feel like you can always see the cracks in all of his productions. Maybe not Alien, but like in Gladiator, this film was huge, and he's definitely hanging on, and I think he makes it to the finish line, unlike some filmmakers this year. But you can kind of feel how rough the production was. This movie would be nothing without Russell Crowe and Joaquin Phoenix. These guys carry the movie all the way. Like the scale and the drama and the visuals, that's all Ridley Scott. But what keeps you watching, let's go, like please show me more, that is Russell Crowe and Joaquin Phoenix, 100%. These guys were vital to the success of this film, and I think it stands the test of time because of them. If they weren't in it, we would have forgotten about this thing decades ago. Now, sometimes Russell Crowe isn't enough to save a movie because then you have back-to-back 2001, A Beautiful Mind. Wow. Russell Crowe tries his best as John Nash in A Beautiful Mind. Like, I've heard about this guy, John Nash, for inventing game theory when I took economics classes in college. So it's like, all right, this is a biopic. So it's like, okay, this is gonna be like Theory of Everything or The Imitation Game. Like war period, post-war period, 50s, 60s, all these great scientists are finding all these formulas and inventing things. So it's like you have all these movies about these guys. It's like, yeah, sure. But it's a biopic. It's a historical biopic. And they're not generals or anything. So there's not like big armies. It's like they're in an office crunching numbers with like their team of mathematicians kind of thing. So it's a different aesthetic to the historical epics, but they are still biopics. So it's a very truncated summary of their life's achievements to fit a 2-hour window. So you don't really get in depth into who they are because we have to wrap it up. He invented another thing 5 years later, so we gotta go. You know, we have to cover everything. That's kind of the mindset these movies have. So I went into this movie expecting Imitation Game, more like Theory of Everything, and then the twist happens. Because I don't actually know the story of John Nash, I just know the things he found, like game theory. So when the stuff happens, the twist about his life that actually did happen, it's surprising, but it's in such a summarized version of it that it's not effective. You're lost for maybe 25 minutes in the movie, like, is this real? What's going on? Whose side is he on? Who can he trust? Who can we trust as the audience? Like, yeah, it's kind of working. And then the movie kind of meets its limit on what it's willing to represent what's happening. You feel that limit. It's not pushing forward. It's just kind of stagnant for the rest of the movie. And then it doesn't go anywhere. It kind of even reverts back to what it was at the beginning. So it like kind of comes full circle, which is supposed to be his arc. But the shot of Paul Bettany kind of crouching behind the psychiatrist's office is the most successful the movie gets at portraying what is happening in a way that puts you on edge. You suddenly realize things aren't what they were. And that's the best the movie gets at it. I'm not saying this guy's life is easy to make a movie out of. In fact, out of all the biopics I've watched, it's probably one of the harder ones. So I'll give the movie credit for trying and, you know, making it as similar to the other great man biopic movies that I've seen. But honestly, like after seeing Oppenheimer, and I'm not even the biggest fan of Oppenheimer, this guy's life should be in that style of Oppenheimer. The different perspectives, the different color grades, the different time jumps and everything. It really should be in that style and not Theory of Everything, linear, romanticized great man philosophy, historical biopic. It should critique what it means to be this great, which is what Oppenheimer is doing. And now I appreciate Oppenheimer more after this movie than when I watched it in 70mm IMAX. But in terms of who John Nash was as a person, I'm still kind of lost on the goal the movie was trying to make. Besides truncating his life to seem similar to other movies for awards buzz. Next up is Chicago from 2002. We're still in that awkward phase of the early 2000s where cinema doesn't really know what it wants to be because of certain events in 2001. So we're still trying to do historical epics, romances, biopics stuff. Chicago's kind of like, okay, what about Broadway? You know, yeah, Broadway. I have never seen Chicago. I didn't know the storyline. I've seen Coyote Ugly and Burlesque. I've not seen Showgirls. In my head, I'm putting all four of those movies like in the same category, as in women dancing on elevated surfaces. Yeah, and like men with like bowler hats like clapping and going, woo, yeah. That's what those movies are in my head. Yeah, so I wasn't really ready for what Chicago is really about. And then half the movie is just the Broadway dance choreography with the stage design and the lighting, as in the stuff you go to Broadway to watch Chicago for. Half the movie, it's like the Broadway stage performance with the dance numbers and all that fun stuff. And then the other half is a Hollywood movie. And the Hollywood adaptation side of it is so inferior to the Broadway dances. I'm not a fan of Renee Zellweger, so when we're back in the story world and she's like playing a character and she's acting and she's supposed to win you over, even though her character is a terrible human being, irredeemably like, yeah, I shot the bastard, I don't care. And, oh, I have a husband? Like that level of, wow, this person's just not good. She's not for me. She can't win me over. So I don't like the main character. And then the foil, she's also bad in terms of that, but I thought she was more entertaining. So I wanted to follow her story. And then we keep going back to Renee Zellweger. The lawyer is fun though. When the lawyer shows up, there's a lot of life that gets breathed into the movie. And he's like a sleazy, spineless dirtbag. And he's just there for the money, but he knows how to make a show out of it. It's like, oh, this guy I like. There are two sequences, I will say, that utilize the Broadway dances and the Hollywood adaptation together in the edit that I think were worth it. The hanging scene where the woman gets hung at the prison in the courtyard, the way they do the dance number and the way they kind of connect it to like probably what happened at that time where it's just everyone's just watching in silence. And like the way the sound design works with the rope and people clapping and the silence and the noise, really well done. I did like that. The other one that's more in terms of like the Broadway kind of helping the Hollywood adaptation filmmaking and not just the edit is the lawyer telling Renee Zellweger, the courtroom is like a circus. You just got to make a show out of it. So when they're in the courtroom, when it's like an objective perspective of them in the courtroom, it's in the real setting of a courtroom. But when the lawyer is telling her to act and he's like explaining it to her, that's when it goes back to the Broadway setting with the colors and there's like dancers and lights and streamers and feathers and everything's colorful and crazy and noisy and out of control. You can see what the lawyer is trying to create through the introduction of the Broadway elements of the film setting. It's really fun. So those two scenes, I'll give it credit, between the 50-50 interplay. Honestly, I would just much rather watch it on Broadway than the movie itself. Woo! All right, now we're gonna get to the weird stuff. Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. This award is more for the collective movies, the trilogy itself. I watched all three of these movies in one sitting as the theatrical cuts. We all watched the extended editions, and that's like 3 to 5 extra hours of film that I have to watch in one sitting. Like, it is actually a marathon. And those didn't win the awards. The theatrical release won the award. The Lord of the Rings trilogy is a miracle. These movies should not be this good. Like, I grew up with this stuff. The theatrical cut of these movies have one goal: Frodo, ring, mountain, that is it. Any other distractions, like Gimli asking for a hair from Galadriel? Nope, no time. We gotta get the ring to the mountain. The different romances of the human characters. No, get out of here. We gotta get the ring to the mountain. There's a lot of stuff that's cut out that's like, wow, really? Not even that scene? Okay. Gimli and Legolas talking about their kill counts at every battle, not in the theatrical cut. Even though they're counting who they kill, 18, 19, 20, like 45, 43. Them like talking, it's like, what'd you get? What'd you get? Not in the theatrical cut. The punchline to the running gag through two of these movies didn't make either cut. Are you serious? Always a blast to watch these movies. I had not seen them for maybe 10 years. The first half of this decade is rough. Like if you move Lord of the Rings, boop, to the back half of the decade, the early 2000s is almost forgettable. No offense to Gladiator. Gladiator's 90s. These next two movies are gonna be quick because they're rough. Million Dollar Baby. I will say, in defense of this movie, Morgan Freeman's narration, this is one of the better ones. I think he adds a lot to this movie. And Clint Eastwood, this is one of Clint Eastwood's more emotional performances. I was kind of feeling it from him. So, a little bit impressed. Something happens at the end of this movie. When you think the climax and like the movie's gonna end, the real movie starts. And I knew that going in, so I was preparing myself for it. This is not a boxing movie. I think the first hour and a half is boxing. And it's honestly a pretty good kind of American folktale rags to riches boxing story. And then that happens. If you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. If you don't, I don't recommend this movie. I thought it was gonna be like maybe 15 minutes after that happens that we're gonna end. No, it's like 40 minutes. It is a significant chunk of the movie is after the surprise. It's not as bad as I thought it would be, but it's like you're sitting through it. It's just like, I don't wanna be here because you know what's gonna happen and you don't want it to happen. Some movies do that very well. This movie kinda feels like a punch in the face, and that is definitely on purpose. I'm not a fan of that. That's not my style of what I wanna watch. Especially when you've made me comfortable after 90 minutes. You're sitting, it's like, oh yeah, this movie's actually better than I thought. Bam! It's like, oh, okay, we're doing this now. How long? 40 minutes? Okay, fine. I'll just sit here, wait for it to end. It overstays its welcome. It's the most mythical fantasy of American life ever that I have seen. And the fact that it's trying to tell that rags to riches, pull yourself from your bootstraps, it's doing it perfectly. And then it still ends in tragedy. That is a very interesting creative choice. Like, I'll give Clint Eastwood that. But Clint Eastwood's doing it in like his way. It just feels jagged and gross. I will say, the last shot is one of Clint Eastwood's best. Like, there are some directors that are 50-50 on like a final shot. I mean, Unforgiven, fantastic. This movie, I don't like the ending, I don't. But the last shot, honestly, almost saves the movie. Next up is Crash, written and directed by the same writer of $1 Million Baby, Paul Haggis. So this guy, screw this guy, I hate him. I think most people hate him. Because Crash is known around town as being the worst Best Picture winner of all time. And I agree with that. It's painful to watch. It's the most racist movie I've ever seen. Its main theme and focus is racism in 2000s America. That is a very bold thing to do for a movie in 2004. It is very inspired by 9/11. Its execution of that idea is to have every character play a stereotype, to be like, wow, aren't stereotypes like wrong? But all of your characters are stereotypes doing super racist things. We start this movie with two black guys coming out of a restaurant being like, man, that waitress sucked. Well, that's because people don't think we tip. Did you tip? And the other guy's like, no, I didn't tip because the service was bad. It's like, all right, honestly, as someone that has worked in a restaurant, people believe that stereotype. There's nuance to be discovered in that reality. After this conversation, they're like, man, doesn't it suck to be black in LA? Then they pull out two guns and they rob a white couple of their car. What the hell? The best scene is Michael Pena's character talking to his daughter under her bed. I would say the only good scene in this movie, because it's actually a very sweet moment between the dad and his daughter because she's scared. So the director's cut extends that scene. Great, you know the best part of the movie, so you should keep it. But no, for the theatrical release, let's chop it in half. We gotta get back to the racist stuff. Wow, it's so bad. Like, all the things that you think you know about it, it's worse. Not like evil worse, just like disappointed. Like, we should know better. That was like the low point of this whole New Year's resolution thing. That movie honestly broke me. And then I got to watch The Departed from 2006. The Departed was my first Scorsese movie. And I would say it's a pretty good intro for him. It's a very different movie than some of his other ones. It's still a gangster movie. The best Alec Baldwin performance. The fact that he just screams out, I love the Patriot Act, in the middle of this movie. It's like, finally, the 2000s movies are talking about what's going on. Love it. There's a lot going on with that. The line reads in this movie are delicious because the cast is just so good. Jack Nicholson notoriously improvised consistently on set, out of the blue. The one scene where he's talking to DiCaprio and he brings out a gun and he's like, ooh, look at this. He just brought that on set. That was not part of the script. All these guys you can tell have the biggest egos as like celebrities. So when the camera's rolling, they're all like packed into these rooms, so they're throwing stuff at each other to one up everybody. And like, that's the whole point of the movie. So it's just really fun to watch him like kind of throw little jabs here or there. And it's just wicked fast. The way it just keeps evolving and getting worse, and everyone is just digging deeper graves. And it's like, well, I can't climb out of this now. I just got to keep going. It's that kind of movie where you know everybody's screwed. So you're just going to have the time of your life watching them, like the floor is falling beneath their feet. Like one of those movies. And Scorsese is the king of making those movies. I can't give all the credit to the men in front of the camera and Scorsese, because this is an adaptation of a Hong Kong action movie called Internal Affairs. Like that one scene where Matt Damon's on one side of the flip phone and DiCaprio's on the other side of the flip phone. That is ripped straight out of the Hong Kong movie. Like beat for beat. Even the flip phones, which by the way, the flip phones in this movie, I don't know what it is. I think it's the sound design of the snap and the ringtones and like the whoosh, what do you want? Like that kind of thing. Flip phones look good in this movie. I'm gonna give a credit to Internal Affairs for like the inspiration of the idea. But I think the strongest part of this movie is the edit. And I think the strongest part of every Scorsese movie is the edit. And you're thinking, oh, is he an editor? No, he's not. Because he works with like the best editor in the industry for every one of his pictures, Thelma Schoonmaker. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. She is the best editor out there, like easily. She is so good. Her work on this movie, amazing. Just adrenaline, claustrophobic. Like either you're on cocaine for half the movie or you're having a panic attack. It's like she's that good at keeping your pulse through the roof the entire time, especially when it's on DiCaprio's character, because he's losing his mind, so you're losing your mind with him. She's edited every Scorsese film after Mean Streets. So when you talk about Scorsese, you can't talk about how good he is without Thelma Schoonmaker. Like she is, I would say like at least a third, maybe 50% of why he's as good as he is. They're in it together kind of thing. Really impressive. She's probably one of the best filmmakers out there right now. Next up is No Country for Old Men from 2007. Coen Brothers movie. Let's go. Scorsese is one of my favorite directors. The Coen Brothers are my favorite directors. These guys I love to death. I have seen pretty much every single one of their movies. I would say most people say this is their best movie. I like A Serious Man and Big Lebowski more, but like, this is a perfect movie. Wow, I'm reading all my notes for all the stuff I wrote down for this movie. It's a little too college essay-esque, you know? If you have never watched a Coen Brothers film before, the best way I can describe them is they love capturing the essence of rural Americana, but in a supernatural way where the characters aren't in charge of their destiny. Like there is a God, but it's not like a good God. Like it's not like the God you're thinking of. Every character in a Coen Brothers movie is subject to the whims of chance and nature. They are not in control of anything. And I think that's really fun to kind of see all these guys kind of flail about trying to change things. And it's just like, no chance. No Country for Old Men, perfect movie. One of the scariest villains of all time. Great performance from Josh Brolin as the main character that no matter how hard he tries to escape his fate, it is sealed because of what he does. Probably one of the best performances from Tommy Lee Jones. Like, everyone would be talking about how good he is if Javier Bardem's Anton Chigurh was not in this movie. Like, that's how good this movie is, where it's like, wow, this is a career best. Too bad this dude's in it. Like, it's one of that things. Next up is Slumdog Millionaire. It's a Danny Boyle movie, who's like a white British, maybe Scottish filmmaker, talking about like contemporary problems in India. So it's like kind of an outsider doing this kind of movie. I don't know if that's like a controversy, but I will say, like, kind of going in, it's a very visceral movie. Like, Danny Boyle is all about making films that are dirty. Like 28 Days Later started out, he filmed on a camcorder, like that kind of thing. Like that's his level of, I want it to be grainy and gross. Visually, I think what he's doing works really well with the slums of Mumbai. Like where these characters are growing up, his filmmaking style matches it. There is a weird thing that I personally don't know about destiny in Indian culture, because the main character is Muslim. He is not Hindu, but there's this weird thing about, like, it is written. He's on this show getting all these questions right. Is it because he's a genius? Is it because he's a cheater? Or is it because it is written? Like, the fact that he believes it will happen, it's going to. The movie shows he fought every day of his life to have a reason to live. And now he does. So he's on this show getting all these questions right, not because he's like, He looks back through his entire life and he remembers things through very traumatic episodes. And those things just happen to be the answers for these questions. So it's not altruism, but it is like fighting to survive means you will survive, but that is destiny? That's the thing I don't get. He worked for this. He worked hard for this. But the movie is like, oh, but it's written. And in my American capitalist, like free market mind, it's like, well, okay, if you work for it, it's not destiny, that's you. I feel like this movie is saying something that is outside of my headspace. And it's not like, oh, but the filmmaker's Indian, so they would understand. It's like, well, he's an outsider too, so I don't know. That's Danny Boyle. Boop. Dev Patel, the main actor. This was his big break. He is amazing. He really elevates every project he's in that I have seen. Dev Patel is really in maybe a third of this movie, because there are 3 different actors that play him, his brother, and his love interest. 3 different actors for each. It's really cool. So when it's the kid actors, Danny Boyle is like doing his classic stuff. And then the last 30 minutes, when they're like the actors' ages, it kind of becomes like a Bollywood film, like a Bollywood romance from the early 2000s. More flip phone stuff. Pacheep. Whoa, who's that? Because they're used as like a big dramatic reveal in the Bollywood portion of it. The last 30 minutes are very different. The first 90 minutes are the gross, this kid is kind of fighting to survive and hopefully, learning the things he needs to know for the questions along the way. And then the last 30 minutes, it's like he's won over everybody because of his sad life story, and he's won over us, hopefully, that we now get to like enjoy watching him succeed. Mumbai as a city completely changes, and so does the film. Visually, with the equipment, it's a lot smoother camera work, it's a lot cleaner images. The color is way less saturated, which is interesting, but then it becomes like this romantic, triumphant Bollywood story. And I do think that kind of clashes with the threats and the reality that the film exists in for the first 90 minutes. A lot of visceral reactions in the first half, and then you get to like enjoy yourself in the last. But there is kind of a conflict in it that I personally don't know how to define. I would recommend you see it and figure it out on your own, because there's a lot going on. Every time I do these videos, I like make a big ass drink and I never finish them. Well, I know I have it in me, it's just I'm talking too much. The last movie we're gonna talk about this decade is The Hurt Locker. So we went from 90s historical grand epic to screw it, let's do Broadway, to high fantasy, to racism, maybe, to Alec Baldwin loving the Patriot Act, to now we are in the Iraq War. This decade was a roller coaster. There are a lot of people out there that do not like this movie, mostly because of the camera work, and like every movie in like 2009 especially, a lot of shaky cam. So of the time, I understand that. Today though, this film is pretty much perfect. I like the shaky cam. I think it has aged very well. in terms of what it is trying to achieve. Documentary style in Baghdad with this bomb defusing crew. It's doing that to like feel as realistic as possible. Think of like Friday Night Lights, where it's like, why the hell is this camera so zoomed in over the coach's shoulder being like, are you gonna join the team or not? Like, that's what it is. But we're in Iraq. We're not in a Texas football kid's bedroom, you know? I will say another movie that came out that same year was District 9, which is doing the same thing, but with aliens and talking about apartheid in South Africa. So that was also nominated for Best Picture. So I feel like a lot of people that complain about this movie is because they didn't want it to win Best Picture. From 1945 to 2009, the Best Picture nominations were 5 films every year. From 2009, so like 2010 award ceremony, to now, it's 10 movies a year because not enough people were watching the Oscars. If we do 10 movies, we'll put in a movie that people have actually seen. Like this year, Avatar. So we have Avatar, Up, District 9, Inglourious Bastards, another Coen Brothers movie, A Serious Man, which is my favorite, and then this movie. So like, I can see why people complain about it for winning over a film they like. I think it is better now than what it was when it came out. It has that looking back, introspective quality to it that something like what I'm doing right now, it's built for that. So of course I'm gonna defend it because I'm watching it with that context. It is a movie of the time it was made in. So I respect that it has things that people complain about being used too much of that time. It's like, yeah, of course they're gonna do shaky cam. It's 2009. Why would you not use shaky cam? So it's like that. I really like this movie for being exactly what it needs to be. Also, directed by Catherine Bigelow, who, until Chloe Zhao won for Nomadland in like 2020, 2021, was the only female director to win Best Director. And she won Best Picture the same year that her ex-husband James Cameron had a movie come out, and that was Avatar. Like, this tiny film about 3 bomb diffusers in Iraq beat Avatar. But there are some other great movies that year that I think are great movies, but in terms of the Best Picture of 2009, it's this. All right. That was the 2000s. It continues to be kind of an adventure to watch all these movies back to back to back. There's a lot of similarities and trends and stuff that you notice when you kind of marathon it, that the 2000s didn't have one until like the very end. The last half of this decade really saved it. So I'm glad it did, because it was looking a little rough. I'm gonna put my ranked list right here. Yeah. I'm excited to rewatch the next decade, and I'm excited for you guys to watch it as well with me. The ride keeps on going, and it keeps being a surprise. So thank you guys for sticking with it. I'll see you in the 2010s.